Okay, check 1 2, check 1 2. Testing, testing. Let's see here. Get this all set up. I apologize for the late start. I've stated recently, if you're not aware, I've had to shake up my schedule lately, so things are a bit unpredictable, but we are getting through it. They will definitely get more predictable. So, tonight's stream is going to be a very interesting one, I think. Tonight's stream is going to be on the interview that Chris Langan did with Michael Knowles. And there's a lot to say about this interview, and I'm very much looking forward to discussing it. But before that happens, please hit the like button. It really helps with the algorithm. It makes me feel weird asking, but it really does need to be said. It helps a lot. So please do that if you find this content interesting. Also, I would like to say at the beginning of this, just in case there's any issues with this with copyright, if Chris Langan and his people see this and have an issue with this being up, or Michael Knowles in the Daily Wire, please contact me personally. Do not just flag the channel. I would sincerely appreciate it. And I do understand why we could face issues for this, because it was not actually something that ended up being released by the Daily Wire as it was intended. And instead, the audio was released only by Chris Langan. And I'm really glad that he got a hold of that audio. I wanted to listen to this interview and watch it for, I don't even know how long, many, many months. And I didn't, eventually when the Daily Wire decided not to air it, I didn't think I would ever hear it. And luckily, Chris Langan released it. So there are links down below in the description of this video to Michael Knowles' YouTube channel, to the CTMU Radio YouTube channel, and to Chris Langan's Substack, so that you could listen to the entire discussion if you would like to do that. And I do recommend that. It was a great talk. It's a shame that this was not released, but I want to talk about it because I think that a lot of important things were said, and it was a fascinating discussion. Hats off to both Chris and Michael Knowles for having had this discussion. I don't know exactly what led to it not being released. I could guess that there were a number of things, but I'm glad that Michael Knowles and Chris Langan at least decided to go through with the interview. I don't think either of them is responsible for this not getting released. It was probably people who are not involved in this discussion, but who are, at the Daily Wire. But like I said, please hit the like button. It really helps with the algorithm, and we will get started. So comment in the chat any questions that you have. What's up, Preston? Preston Brady. Good evening. Yeah, it is the evening, so I apologize for it being a bit later. But, like I said. So, this discussion that was had by Chris Langan and Michael Knowles is fascinating for so many reasons that we're going to get into. But I will just say that I've spoken to Chris Langan a couple times online, and I like Chris Langan. I think that his CTMU work is just incredible, and I definitely have not put enough time into looking at it. But as somebody who has my own work that I'm working on, I tried to, for a while, avoid being led by other people's work. But his work seems to be very, very similar to mine on sentient singularity theory. There's so much overlap. It's crazy. I love listening to him talk about metaphysics, just because so many things align at this point. But that wasn't always the case, and we're going to talk about that. Also, Michael Knowles, I worked with personally at PragerU for many years and had a number of great philosophical discussions with him over cigars, as is what took place in this interview. And that's one of the reasons why I was so excited to watch it or listen to it, because I know how good philosophical discussions over cigars can be with Michael Knowles. So I expected him to do a great job with the interview, and he did. So like I said, I'm glad that the audio at least was released. But so for a bit of introductions, for those who don't know, I'm sure most of you do know, but Michael Knowles is over at the Daily Wire. He has his own show. He did some shows with PragerU for a while that I worked on, like the book club. I think he still does that. And not exactly sure what you would call him other than he's a host at the Daily Wire. He has his own show. There's a link to his YouTube channel below. Chris Langan is someone who is fascinating. I'm going to pull up his Wikipedia page, which is partially nonsense. Wikipedia, allows people to write nonsense on other people's pages sometimes, but Chris has one of the highest measured IQs in the world, and I believe it is the highest ever measured in the United States. And he comes from a background that I identify a lot with, which is one that is not academic. I very much struggled in school, didn't get along with teachers, and I don't have a 200 IQ at all. I probably have a lower IQ than most of the people that I tend to associate with in this theory of everything type of space. Almost certainly I do, but we're going to talk about that. And he got very famous for a while because he went on some shows and of like 1 versus 100, and he won against 100 people, and that went all over the internet. But he started to get blacklisted eventually, and I believe that the main reason for this is because his work with metaphysics implies the existence of God. And my work with metaphysics implies the existence of God. And I have seen firsthand exactly the hostility that comes from academia and people who have, advanced degrees towards people who work on physics and metaphysics and philosophy and end up coming to the conclusion and trying to present the case that essentially God is a logical inevitability, which it certainly appears to be the case. So I very much identify with Chris's work, and I'm glad that he continued to work on the CTMU despite being shut down, in many different instances. I'm sure countless instances. It's really wild how hostile the environment can be to theists in the academic or the intellectual space, which is just a ridiculous word, to be honest. But very, very smart guy, obviously, and has his own theory of everything called the CTMU. And here's my background with Chris Langan that is interesting, and it's related to his IQ and also to the CTMU. And it's related to a clip that that we're going to look at, or a clip of an audio clip, I guess you could say. But when I was in college, and I've shared the story before, I was doing terribly in school, and I was having just like panic that I wasn't going to, get into my program. And I went to the school, and they had me meet with the counselor, and they tested my IQ. And it was higher than it had been measured in the past, and it had been measured prior to that. And it got me interested in IQ, and also got me I knew I needed to work very hard on some classes coming up. And I also started being interested in IQ. And so I started really challenging myself for the first time, being like, you know what, I'm going to commit to school and just see what I'm capable of, because I have no other choice, really. And I, just by doing my homework and attending the study sessions, and that's it, rose to the top of all my classes. But I never did my homework prior to this. That is why I always did terribly. And that was really the only reason. And I ditched a lot of class too, so I stopped ditching. And over this year, I was researching IQ, and I came across Chris Langan, obviously. And I also had not had, and this isn't to gloat, Because like I said, I don't have the highest IQ, but for some reason I've had a lot of practice thinking because I partially wasn't so good at school. So I am just good at figuring things out. And so I didn't really have any intellectual challenges the entire year. It was like remarkable how much I was able to do. And then I found Chris Langan, and I saw that he had a quote unquote theory of everything. And I remember hearing about string theory and not understanding it, and not, having ever taken a physics class. That's not surprising. But when I looked into Chris Langan's theory, I didn't understand anything about it. I didn't understand even the name, Cognitive Theoretic Model of the Universe. It made no sense. And I remember being angry about it. My friend was like, dude, just chill out. Like, these people are way smarter than you. Like, you're a smart guy, but just get over it and, move on. And basically, I just did that. But it was very frustrating. It was like the first time I had ever tried to understand something and just completely over my head. Years and years and years go by. I graduate school. I go and, start my career, and I move away. And I have a theophany, an epiphany about God and physics. And all of a sudden, physics things started to become intuitive in the context of God. Quantum physics, general relativity, both of them. And I had this idea for an experiment that was attached to this perspective on the universe. And I remember being like, I don't know how to articulate this, but I feel like I've discovered like a theory of everything, essentially. And in like an instant. And I was like, you know what? There was that guy who I had forgotten his name at the time, who had come up with that theory of everything and had that 200 IQ that I looked at in college. I wonder if now I would understand his theory. And I went back and I looked up guy with 200 IQ, theory of everything. Obviously, the CTMU comes up, Chris Langan comes up. And I read just the title, The Cognitive Theoretic Model of the Universe. And I immediately understood exactly what it meant. Just by this perspective shift. My IQ didn't go up, but and I didn't study hard for it. I just had a perspective shift on the universe. I saw God, basically, and the context of God, or the context of everything within God. And I started reading a little bit about his theory, and I didn't read much, but I read enough to realize like we were on the same page, and I understood everything that I was reading. I've listened to him now at this point, a number of hours on YouTube, just any videos that he's done. He did an incredible interview with Kurt Mungle that I highly recommend watching. It was like 4 hours long. And he's done a number of others. But just by this perspective shift, I was able to understand Chris Langan's theory. And so in this discussion, though, there's a point where he says that IQ isn't the totality of intelligence, essentially. And I tend to say that IQ is not the totality of smartness, that smartness is the intersection between wisdom and intelligence. And but it's basically, seems to be probably the same thing. And I appreciate that he said that. And I definitely had that experience because, like I said, my IQ never went up, and all of a sudden I was able to understand his work intuitively. And it's an incredible piece of work. One day I hope to have him on here and talk to him about the process of creating the CTMU and to just get more in depth with his work. But if he ever watches this, that is open invitation. But like I said, big fan of his work. I think it's probably the most comprehensive attempt at a theory of everything that exists in modern era. So props to Michael Knowles for having him on. So clip one. Like I said, please hit the like button. It really helps with the algorithm. This is just going, I'm just going to show a photo from their interview while I'm playing the audio because I don't have the video, and there's that. So just so that it's easy to find when I'm playing audio, I will show a photo. This is not an attempt to, violate copyright or anything like that. So 1 minute here. This first one is just the intro to him basically saying what the CTMU is. Okay, here we go. And
cognitive theoretic model of the universe.
Cognitive theoretic model of the universe.
This is your theory of everything.
My theory of everything, and it's all in the name. If you take a good close look at that, you've got cognitive theory, and of course, you know, a theory is a kind of language, theoretic language, okay? And then you've got cognitive theoretic model, you've got a model, and then you've got universe. You've got a language, you've got a universe, and then the model is the mapping between them. CTMU says those are all the same thing. All of those terms, all of those properties are distributed everywhere over reality. Reality can have only one structure once you realize that and you implement it in theoretical form.
So then the question I asked you is kind of a stupid question, because I said, which field was it that attracted you? And your answer is yes.
Well, I would have to say it would have to be logic and language, and then physics and mathematics. Okay, so those are the fields, yeah. And that's what I thought I was conveying. But
yes.
Apparently, I need to spell it out.
You do, because but this is so important that you're not just talking about this siloed aspect of thought, or this, you know, philosophy over here, language over here, math over here, physics over here, but you're presenting something that is universal.
Correct. Correct. Absolute and universal. To get the absolute invariance, the absolute truths of reality. You know, things that are true everywhere you go. No matter, you know, at what time you exist or in what place you exist, it's the same.
okay, so just a brief overview of you know, what a theory of everything is, and you know, this is what a theory of fundamental reality is. It is a theory of essentially the pattern that exists everywhere and always. And it is the umbrella and foundation that encapsulates and supports all other fields of study and all other theories that end up, you know, proving out. And so this is quite an endeavor to do, and I am, as somebody who's experienced with it, and this cognitive theoretic model of the universe, I think is a good descriptive name for it. So, next clip. And this is why Chris Langan this is the main reason, this next clip, that Chris Langan is blacklisted and banned. And it's now, I don't believe that it's really for the reasons that people usually say about anybody who ends up being a theist in this. I think it's literally theism. I have spoken to other people in the theory of everything space who are very well-known, like very well-known people who have also experienced this, and it has prevented them from being overt about the implications of their work because of the hostility that they met from the universities when they presented their ideas. So, next clip here.
Okay, what a lot of high IQ people have a lot of difficulty doing is widening their mental aperture. You've got to be flexible. You've got to be able to widen and narrow that aperture at will as you're doing the depth perception too. So you've got the focus, depth of focus, the magnification, as it were, yeah, plus the aperture. And most people, you know, most high IQ people, they have the magnification, but they don't have the aperture.
So then from the perspective, simultaneously, I suppose, both of depth and breadth here, mm-hmm, if we're talking about a theory of everything, the first question we have to establish, does God exist?
Yes.
Simple as
yes. That. Well, it's the identity has the reality has an identity. Okay, the identity is that as which something exists. Okay, matter of fact, when you say the word reality, you're naming an identity. It is, you're identifying something. This.
I'm smiling because your answer on this is so beautiful. It just reminds me of Moses at the burning bush. And Moses at the burning bush says, "Who shall I tell the people that you are?" Talking to God. And God says, "Tell them I am that I am."
That's right.
I am identity itself. I'm being himself.
That's exactly right. That's what the CTMU says. It just comes up with the mathematical structure that you need to build a reality out of that. You see? So you come up with that identity, and then you search it for its properties. You see, once you've built the preliminary framework, then you start deducing the properties of this identity, and you find out that those properties match those of God as described in most of the world's major religions.
This is what happened to me. I was trying to understand consciousness because I was trying to understand artificial intelligence and whether, whether or not it was going to doom us or save us. I've talked about this before. This is how my work started. And I thought, because I realized we were doomed regardless without it. And I was like, what if a general intelligence arose and changed the game? What would it save us, and what would its inevitable political implications be? Because I just realized that political ignorance is growing and technological capability is also growing, and eventually you're going to reach a intersection point where those things, cancel each other out, and you're going to destroy society. Kind of already started. And this is what it means by, to eat from the fruit of the tree of knowledge. It's a bitten apple, to eat the apple. It's like your iPhone, your MacBook. It has a bitten apple on it. It's because the fruit of the tree of knowledge is technology, and it eventually dooms you if you don't have the moral fortitude to handle it and the wisdom to realize how to handle it properly and responsibly, which we don't have. And this, though, my investigation into this led to me trying to look at consciousness, and I then started identifying, what was the components of self-awareness, and then realized it was just lining up with physics. And that means that we're inside of a sentient being, a conscious being. And this is an incredible, epiphany to have, essentially. And because then when you investigate more, you realize this conscious universe, this sentient existence, does have many attributes of the world's theological traditions, or at least that are, asserted by the world's theological traditions. And now I'm, thoroughly a theist. But at the time, I was a self-described atheist, and that's probably why I didn't understand the CTMU. But he talks about that a bit more. But I love that he said that that reality has an identity. This is a brilliant thing to say. I love this because, I talk about a lot on here how science is so preoccupied with the how and the where and the when and who, what, where, when, why, and how. It's preoccupied with all but two of them, which is why and who. And if you're going to understand reality completely, you need to not just ask where and when and how, but there's one more. I know it. Who, what, where. It's what and what. But yeah, that one's kind of implied. So that's why I missed it. But you also need to ask who and why. And this is what science doesn't do, at least not right now. And the academics discount this completely. Every bit of, intentionality is disconnected from physics. And that will lead to a incoherent model. It just will. And Chris Langan talks about this in this interview. But when people ask me what is God or who is God, or God is existence itself as a singular sentient being. That's what God is. God is the totality of existence, essentially, as a singular sentient being. And God is the creator of the universe. And this is another way of saying that God is the identity of reality. It's the person that is reality. I don't mean human, I mean person. God has feelings and thoughts and goals and desires and all the things that we associate with sentient beings. And Chris gets into this in here. And this is why my work is titled Sentient Singularity Theory. I don't view it as a competitor to Chris Langan's CTMU at all. I think that Chris's CTMU and my work are basically completely aligned. So, from what I've seen, and I'm sure if you looked hard enough, maybe you'd find some disagreements, but I don't, consider it a competitor. Like, a competitor to the CTMU or to sentient singularity theory would be like many worlds and Sean Carroll's kind of model of it, which is just this godless, inevitable but random, multiverse, essentially, and that would be a competitor because it's fundamentally different in its assertions. But this is what Chris Langan said next, which is very cool. I really liked this too. This was a very important point to make when discussing God. This is an essential thing to mention right here.
And the answer is God exists.
God definitely has.
Properties of the central substance and central principle of reality, those properties are attributed to God, including, of course, things like you have the three O's: omniscience, omnipotence, and omnipresence, but then you've also got consciousness. God has to be sentient.
So we're not just defining God out of existence. Sometimes you'll hear people say God exists, but they'll give God such a weak and shallow definition that the God that they're describing has no relation to the God that we conceive of. You're saying no, this God is God. God Himself is conscious and therefore personal.
Yes, you can establish a personal relationship with God. We're images of God. You know what an image is? It's basically the product of a mapping. God maps Himself into each human being, right? That's a very personal thing that God is doing for us, right? And I don't understand how anybody can say that it's any different. We reflect the structure of the universe. Each one of us, we're carried by it. Everything we do, we exist in a medium. What is that medium? Right? Where did it come from?
Yeah.
What holds it together? What is the unifying coherence, the source of coherence of that medium?
Now, is your claim a pantheistic claim that God is the universe or the universe is God and that's that? Or no? Or is God outside of the universe and created?
God is greater than, what is the universe?
Damned if I know.
You ever hear of the simulation hypothesis?
Yes.
Okay, well, the simulation hypothesis is basically the idea that the reality we see around us, physical reality, is simulated on some sort of an automaton or a computer.
Yeah, some aliens somewhere have just, they've fooled us.
Right, exactly. Eat a piece of liquid.
Before one launches into the simulation, one needs a little sustenance,
Okay, so anyway, the idea is that you've got some kind of an automaton running, you've got a simulation running. And God, it's more panentheistic. You know what panentheism is?
I do. I think I do. But that means that we are in God. Let me know how I've gone wrong. We are in God, and God is in us. And it is not merely that God and the creation are one and the same, but they are quite related. So that's something approaching panentheism?
A little bit, yes.
Okay.
There's the idea is that you've got the physical universe that you see around you, but God is not confined to the physical universe.
Okay.
See, there's an ordinary pantheist assumes that God is somehow confined to the universe, that there is just what we see around us, and God is in every piece of it. God is distributed over it.
Yeah.
But it's a little bit more complex than that, because this part of the universe that we see around us cannot exist just by itself.
Yep.
Okay? There are certain things that it entails. And when you go into those entailments, that's how you get to God. That's how you get to the identity of reality. Okay? And now to get back to the reality of self-simulation, or at least that's what I call it, self-simulation. But to get back to the simulation hypothesis, that we're living in the display of that simulation. In addition to the display, there is also a processing aspect. Okay? And God, it captures both of those things.
Okay, awesome. I say both of these things. Obviously, sentient singularity theory is defined if you go to my website and you read on my writings. Sentient singularity theory, the very first sentence of my abstract is, sentient singularity theory is, asserts that existence is a singularity of sentience that is creating additional sentient singularities within itself. So essentially, it's a sentient being that is creating other sentient beings within itself. And there's a pattern that this occurs in, and it goes on, to describe that pattern. But when he says this, he's like, God is sentient. That is the right word to use. People use the word conscious all the time, but nobody really knows what conscious means. And sentient is very much more specifically defined, and it's also it encapsulates the defining attributes that are required for God to be God, and for, even us to be at all. For God to be, for us to be is, to be sentient. And fundamentally, at least. So sentience means to have feelings. And what Michael Knowles said was that a lot of people attribute this definition to God that's vague, and that it basically, they'll say, well, and I hear people say this all the time, I don't really know if I believe in God, but I believe in a higher power. I believe in a higher power. And that means nothing. That means nothing. You believe in something more. It basically means I believe that I don't know everything. Well, no shit. Of course. So, if for God to exist, there is only one definition of God that makes sense. There's only one. When people say things like, well, do you believe in God? Well, yeah, I believe in God. Well, which God? The God. The only God that exists, the only God that can exist, which is that the totality of existence itself as a singular sentient being. The identity itself of reality itself. That is God. I am that I am. I am existence, essentially. I meaning sentient, am meaning existing. I am means like sentient existence. And I talk about this in my video that I did for the PACE 1 competition that was hosted by Kurt Mungle that you can watch. It's called Theories of Everything, a How-To Guide. I highly suggest watching it. It's very good. And it was pretty good. I don't want to I'm probably the biggest critic of it because it was my video. But I thought it was good. But this is the definition of God. Sentient existence. It's the identity of reality itself. That is the God. It's the only definition of God that makes sense. Even the idea of polytheism doesn't even make sense because it basically misdefines what God is. Because if we're going to even use the word God, then it must be that which is the highest being, essentially. It can't be just a powerful being, because there's plenty of powerful beings. I'm more powerful than a cell, and a cell is more powerful than a molecule, and, a cat is more powerful than a mouse, and, angels are more powerful than people, and, if you believe that those exist, and that there's beings beyond us, is what I'm saying. Whatever you want to call them. But that doesn't make them gods. God just isn't anything more powerful than you. God is a specific thing that's unique. It's a specific being that's unique. It's a specific someone that is unique. And there is a singular definition. It's the most inevitable definition of anything or anyone that can exist is the definition of God. Because it's just so inevitable. But it's important to realize that is what God is. Sentient. And it is sentient. He is sentient existence. There is no other definition. Anyone that says like God is pure energy or something like that, that isn't false, but it's not. It doesn't matter. Okay, like it doesn't. You could say that existence is energetic, and maybe then put it into context that matters. But to say God is just energy is wrong. God is logic itself. Like, that's true, but it's not. It doesn't matter. The attribute of God that matters is his identity, his personness, his sentience, and that is what God is. If for God to not exist, existence would not be sentient. Reality would not have an identity. It would be random rocks, which it's not. And but that is the definition of God. What was the other part that he said that I really wanted to touch on?
Damned if I know.
You ever heard of the simulation?
Okay, yeah. So the simulation hypothesis. This is something that I don't know for sure if exactly the CTMU agrees with what my perspective is with sentient and my conclusions with sentient singularity theory, but is that basically that God, the simulation hypothesis, he calls it a self-simulation. That makes me assume that we actually agree, because basically I think that this is God's attempt at replication, essentially. And it's a self-simulation. When it's like having a child, essentially, is, the universe is creating other sentient beings, which I call verses in my, at the highest level below God, creator God, is what is called a verse in my my model, and it is basically that each universe is simulating itself basically replicating through that process, and it's interesting that he used the analogy of basically a desktop, and this is what I've said before as well. I've never heard him say that, but it was great. Is that I don't know if this is exactly what he means, but I've stated that space-time is essentially the desktop of your computer. It is where change happens. It is the change space. It is where we can make decisions and move. We're like a sentient file on that desktop that's changing, and then God is sitting there on the computer, but also is the computer and interacting with us by changing the desktop, and then we change and do something, and then he changes the desktop, and then we, do something. And there's this reciprocal relationship that actually is personal. Whether we realize it's personal or not is a different question, but it is personal regardless. And it's intentional. But then the afterlife, essentially, I believe, is kind of like when you close a file. You're done writing it out, and you're like, this is the story of my life. And then you click, quit and save. Hopefully you save it. If it's just incoherent nonsense, and he talks about this, maybe God doesn't save the file, and he's like, this isn't worth saving. But we should pray that he does hit save on that file to the hard drive, essentially, which is, kind of more where processing takes place. It's the substructure of reality that we perceive. What we perceive is kind of, it's the desktop. You're on the desktop, essentially. But I thought that was great that he basically used the same analogy, and also that he specifically used the word sentient. I mean, that is so critical to defining God. If God isn't sentient, then God doesn't exist. But God does exist, and reality is sentient. The next thing is that he talks about that I want to show is he talks about how consciousness essentially is the structure that unifies, I mean, essentially quantum mechanics and general relativity, but he says it's basically saying that that is the structure that quantizes the universe, and we'll listen to it because I completely agree with him on that, by the way. There is there's a model in my theory called a quantum of consciousness. So here, next.
But to get back to the simulation hypothesis, that we're living in the display of that simulation. In addition to the display, there is also a processing aspect, okay? And God, it captures both of those things. It captures both the display and the processor.
What do you mean? I hate to put it in the...
Well, I mean, okay, here's the display. You realize the display contains states.
Yep.
Okay, you see things, the objects contains it. States are static.
Yep.
That's why they're called states. Yeah. Okay, static. How do they change? Well, they have to be processed. Something has to be processed.
Yeah.
And in the calculus, for example, those are tiny little infinitesimal intervals. Okay, but they are not actually contained in the states themselves. They have a neighborhood, a little tangent space or what have you, where you can sort of draw little vectors that suggest that some kind of processing is going on. But the idea of being a state and being a process, those are two different things.
Yep.
In the ordinary way of looking at it, okay? It turns out that you can't properly describe reality and causation at all unless you put those things together somehow. And that's what it takes God to do, okay? God provides the processing functionality for your state. You have an internal state, an external state. You're a material human being, right? But to explain how that is changing through time, and maintaining its coherence through time, even as it changes, that's what you need God for.
Yeah, I certainly agree with that entirely. And so I might not be sophisticated enough to parse all of the quibbles that there might be, but broadly speaking, as a Christian, so much of what you're saying resonates as obviously true for me. The idea that, I'm a member of the body of Christ. The idea that God creates the world in this great act of love, this great act of charity.
Self-love.
Well,
self-love. Don't forget, you're an image of God.
Right.
So in loving Himself, God loves you.
And
you're supposed to love God back.
Right, and this ties into something like the Trinity, right? The idea that God is three persons in one divine unity. So all of this is making a lot of sense to me. So now, how do I make sense of consciousness?
Well, ordinarily, you know what quantum mechanics, quantization is?
I know the word.
Yeah. Well, you decide what the ultimate irreducible objects are.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the quanta in terms of which you reason. It turns out that in order to quantize that theory that I was talking about, that theory of identity, where you've got the display, you've got the processor, and it's handling both. It turns out that in order to handle both of those things, you need a certain kind of quantum. That quantum is called an identity operator. God is the identity. So obviously these little quanta, they have to be, they're doing things, they're processing, so we can call them operators, right? They are identity operators. Okay, the identity operator it takes input from the outside world, recognizes it or accepts it using syntax, processes it, and then returns it to the world as external state. Okay, so things come in, then they're processed, right? There's throughput, which is, you could call that the subjective or internal state of the identity operator, and then it's returned to the external universe.
But are you attributing now...
So what I'm saying is that's consciousness. And I'm saying that consciousness exists in every part of the universe because those are the quanta.
That's what I'm asking. Are you telling me that this table is conscious?
In that sense, yes. Generically conscious. But it's relying on our consciousness to do it. There's levels of quanta, okay? These are tertiary quanta. They're all put together using physical localistic forces, right? But those are underdeterminative. They don't fully determine what happens. Why? The Heisenberg uncertainty principle, for example, it tells you that, the quantum rules, they're probabilistic. Right. They don't actually determine events. Okay.
So I basically, if I'm correct, he's basically saying that the quantum of reality is our conscious beings, essentially. And if that's the case, then I very much agree with that. That is just an inevitability. This attempt to pixelate the universe, and I get why the perspective would exist, and I understand. But or to find, to quantize it in a way that doesn't take consciousness into effect is impossible. You can't do it. There is, as he said, no way to maintain coherence in any other way, other than basically realizing that sentience or consciousness is the foundation that all of this stuff is built on. And it is the maintainer of information coherence. You cannot maintain information coherence outside of conscious intentionalness or intentionality. You can't. And outside of consciousness and intentionality, there is no coherence. It's it's super simple. That it seems complicated, but it's actually super simple. It's literally impossible for it to be any other way. And if you think about it, that makes sense, because, and it seems obvious, because entropy seems to be the default of, unconscious matter in our world. Everything that you look at that you perceive as not conscious, like a wall, which I would say, yes, everything is part of consciousness because God is sentient and everything is within God. I would not define a wall as conscious. It sounds like he has qualifiers in the CTMU about like different levels of consciousness, and I understand that, and that might be the right way to do it. In sentient singularity theory, things are split up between beings, and things are emergent from beings, essentially from the motivations and interactions and perspectives and constraints and dimensions of sentience. So things come from beings, and there's a whole framework in my model that explains that the molecules in a wall might be conscious, but the wall isn't conscious. It's due to our consciousness that we perceive it as a wall locally, because of the entanglement relationships between the particles and the molecules in the wall, and therefore, our position in the universe then manifests a wall. And it's also our goals, our intentions in our mind are partially responsible for the world that we see around us. I'm not saying completely, and that you have the power of to do whatever you want. I'm just saying that the sentience defines things. Things are not fundamental to sentience. Sentience is fundamental to things, which means like our definitions and goals are fundamental to unconscious things that we see, like walls or cars or light bulbs, etc. But it is all part of consciousness, and I just don't think that that's very helpful to say, because if everything is consciousness, then it's a kind of a useless word all of a sudden, even though that's not false. But yeah, I mean, that's definitely still true, though.
Out of the universe, because those are the quanta.
But when he's talking about quantizing the universe and the changing of states, I just want to listen to the details of that for hours, because this is very much similar to the implications of my work. In fact, I have videos about basically how you have to split reality into states and actions, essentially. And so you can see, this is just a very quick video that's on my page that might be interesting to some, but has to do with quantum computing essentially, but so if you can't read that, the goal here is to change information and from one state essentially to another. This is the initial matrix, this is the final matrix, and we have to change the information. And there's two ways to do this while maintaining coherence. And that's the key. You can see there's perspectives or states and actions, which is, and it's counting them. And then when you allow for superposition to be in effect, then you can just do it in, 4 perspectives and 3 actions, versus kind of calculative computing was like 17 and 16. 17 states, I believe, and 16 actions. So, but you do have to split reality into these 2 aspects. He's totally right. And this is because of what sentience is, what a sentient being is. A being is, what's interesting about a being is that it exists, I exist as a state of existence, but I am also a process. It's not, we don't call each other bees, we call each other beings. Like, it's active, and yet at the same time it is intrinsically linked to and required to have states, because states are where information is observed essentially and perceived and classified and decided upon, and everything else that you do. Then there's an action that leads to the next state. So you have to break down the universe into this, and this is what a lot of people who are not theists don't understand about the universe, is that they don't know how to unify these things. And a lot of times they don't even realize that these are the 2 things that they're trying to unify, is states and actions essentially, and lineages and individuals, and quantum mechanics and general relativity. It's all this 2 sides of one coin thing, and the coin is always sentience. And you can't unify those things without taking without sentience. You just can't. I mean, it's just impossible, because information cannot be cannot maintain coherence. Entropy without sentience is inevitable. I mean, if completely without sentience, there couldn't even be entropy. There couldn't be anything. But even within the universe that we know, already taking it as existing, just for the sake of argument, outside of sentience, there is nothing but entropy. In the change space, the space-time desktop, where things are, decisions are acted out, essentially. I mean, think about it. If you get a car and you never maintain it, what happens? It falls apart. You build a wall and you never maintain it. It falls apart. You never maintain yourself. You fall apart. Everything falls apart without intentional action that is specifically intended to maintain information coherence in some way. And so he's very, very right. You can't have any kind of coherent model of information without sentience. Okay. It's the next clip. This next clip is about sin. And I've talked a lot about on here how a theory of everything, and this is another reason why a theory of everything doesn't go anywhere a lot of times, and it's why it's denied by a lot of people, And it's because a toe steps on a lot of toes. And I talked about this in my video, The Theories of Everything How-To Guide, and I mentioned the CTMU in there as one of the theories that I think needs to be taken seriously. And the CTMU comes to the same, conclusions that sentient singularity theory seems to imply, which is that if you're going to unify all fields, eventually you're going to have to unify objective pursuits of truth with morality. And this is obviously inevitable. As soon as you think about this is obviously inevitable. But unfortunately, we live in a time where we're really disconnected from reality in the common culture, and there is a narrative that tries to separate science from any type of, or the pursuit of knowledge from any type of moral pursuits. And you can't do that. I mean, if you're going to have a theory of everything, it's going to have certain moral implications on all kinds of actions. And so he talks about sin here a bit. And this is, I realize, a uncomfortable thing for many people, but it is for everyone, because nobody wants to be told what to do, and nobody wants to find out that what they enjoy is bad, objectively, to like the most supreme and highest being in the world. But just remember, or try to imagine at least that being loves you as well. So sin is talked about here, and I like what Michael Knowles has to say about it, and I like what Chris Langan has to say about it.
That's what I'm asking. Are you telling me that this table is conscious?
In that sense, yes, generically conscious, but it's relying on our consciousness to do it. There's levels of quanta. Okay, these are tertiary quanta. They're all put together using physical localistic forces, right? But those are underdeterminative. They don't fully determine what happens. Why? The Heisenberg uncertainty principle, for example, it tells you that the quantum rules, they're probabilistic.
Right.
They don't actually determine events.
Yep.
Okay? So what determines events? We do. We don't know how we do it, but we do it. When everybody's will is put together, we're all creating the best possible universe we can for ourselves. And God is what harmonizes all of our different perspectives and makes things happen for all of us at the same time. And if we were doing things correctly, this would be the best of all possible worlds. Sadly, however, we oftentimes make mistakes. And that's what we have to get out of doing, but we can't get out of doing it until we understand what reality is, what we are, and what the relationship between those two things is.
Now,
Brilliant. This is exactly true. And we have cut ourselves off from the identity of reality. And that is why we are so morally and bankrupt and in a meaning drought, a drought of meaning, or a crisis of meaning, as people call it. It is because we don't know what reality is. In fact, we have a false impression of what reality is. It's not even that we're trying to figure it out. It's that we're starting from false assumptions due to, for some reason, the prevalence of anti-theism in the university and system in the academic world. That is the reason, essentially, for our current mess that we're in. But that doesn't mean people are perfect. And if we all believed in God, would we all be perfect? No, we would still sin. And sin is described by many people as missing the mark. And in this interview, Michael Knowles states that he read somewhere some poem or something that other than sin just being evil, it's also just a huge waste of time. And that is very true. Think about what is sinful in your life that you do. And everybody does sinful things. So, I'm not accusing anybody, and I'm not excluding myself. But just think about it. It doesn't matter what it is. It's a huge waste of time. And obviously, people do it because it's pleasurable, whatever it is. And that, or it's enjoyable at least but in like a visceral kind of instinctual way. And that's pretty much true of all sin. And, it's still a huge waste of time. But what Chris Langan is saying here, though, is that God kind of beyond time looks at everybody's actions and harmonizes them, and looks at all of our decisions and harmonizes them. And basically, this is exactly what my model states as well. And there's a model that I have where basically God has 4 degrees of freedom and, 4 dimensions to his sentience, and we have 4 dimensions to our sentience, and there's 3 dimensions overlapping in a certain way that each of us has 2 degrees of freedom plus 1 intrinsic constraint plus 1 extrinsic constraint. And for us, there's forwards towards a goal, backwards away from a goal. Those are 2 degrees of freedom plus an intrinsic constraint, which is we are always in our current position, whatever that, because you can't escape your current position, you're always in it. And then there's an extrinsic constraint, which is basically time, and that's controlled by God. And God has his 4 dimensions to his sentience, and there's his degrees of freedom, 2 degrees of freedom, plus an intrinsic constraint and an extrinsic constraint. His extrinsic constraint is space, essentially. And he maneuvers time, but he can't maneuver in space so much because he is space. So it's kind of an intrinsic constraint for him, but that's why he looks at all things at once, because to him, time is something that he can maneuver. And he does so based on our decisions. So, you decide to do this, and God decides to do that. And you decide to do this, and God decides to do that. And sometimes he makes a decision and tries to get you to do this. And depending on how you respond, he makes another decision. But his decisions are happening outside time. So they're not happening in the same, he doesn't experience time in the linear way that we do. He experiences time as simultaneity, essentially. And that's very hard for us to imagine. At least it is for me. Maybe if you have a 200 IQ, it's easier. But it's not really, I don't think, so much about IQ. I think it's just about the fact that it's not the reality that we experience. But you do have a personal relationship with God, though, and he is personally concerned with the things that we do. And he's happy about the things that we do that are good and not so happy about the things that we do that are bad. But when Chris is talking about, if we all did the right thing, then the world would be amazing. And this is what the Messianic era is. It's when the world unites, wisdom is dispersed. We have, I think it's in the CTMU, it's called the human singularity. And it's kind of like, I would imagine, at least according to sentient singularity theory, if it's in alignment with it, at least, it would be the singularity that happens after the text singularity, which is, text singularity is kind of like the Antichrist, and then the human singularity would be like the Messianic Christ consciousness. And there's different opinions on what that means, and but we won't get into them too much tonight. But it's a unification and a of beingness and a wisdom explosion, essentially. And at that point, then people will behave in the way that they should. But right now, the issue is that because we ate from the fruit of the tree of knowledge and created technology and then tried to create our own world instead of existing in the world that God had created for us, we basically have an environment now that is outside of alignment with our instincts. So our instincts drive us to sin, whereas in the garden, prior to technological civilization, that's what that means, our instincts were in alignment with our environment. They drove us to do good, and now they don't. And eventually, the two will be reconciled again, and because of God. Thank God for that, literally. So this next part is about the afterlife, and I think that this is an important thing to talk about. It's something that everybody wants to know about, and there are logical implications, seemingly logical, inevitable implications about what is the afterlife, and we'll hear what he has to say about it.
I can only look at physics, and I have to use what I know about physics, what I can observe about physics, to explain everything else that I explain. So they have that kind of explanatory closure
Yeah.
going right there.
So, speaking of this non-terminal domain, in a really basic question, I'm not going to ask you if I'm going to go to heaven or hell, but will I go to either heaven or hell?
You will persist after you die. Okay? Where you go depends on who Michael Knowles really is. You would know that better than anyone.
Yeah, I hope I know that better than. But you're telling me I'm going somewhere.
Yes.
You're confident of that. I don't just evaporate. I don't just turn into oblivion.
Well, you can. If you displease God, that's exactly what's going to happen to you. God is going to cut you off, and he's going to say, I can't see him anymore. He's going to turn away from you, and then you won't be able to reunite. Salvation will be impossible for you, because salvation means that God has got to pull you back into himself.
Right.
Okay, but God doesn't want to see you anymore. He doesn't even know you exist. He knows your physical body is there, but he's not interested anymore because you hate him, you deny his existence, you offend him, so he's not going to look at you, right? So now what happens? Well, okay, you're dead. You still want to live. There's something in you that still desperately wants to live, so it's still going to be there. What happens now? Well, you try to create your own world for yourself, but if you're a bad person or you're an evil person, what kind of world is that going to be? It's going to be an evil world, and that's what we call hell.
This is what John Milton says in The Mouth of Satan. He says, the mind is its own place, and it can make a hell of heaven or heaven a hell.
Now you got it.
It reminds me of Dante also, this idea of God turning away. At the very deepest part of hell is Satan frozen in a lake of ice of his own making because of the flapping of his own wings, because he's apart from the warmth of God.
Precisely.
Okay.
That's the way it has to work.
So,
Okay. So, again, I agree with what he's saying. That, it is a logical inevitability that you will persist unless that is the default. I'm not saying God can't delete you. God can do what he wants. But the natural logical inevitability when you die in this world, when you, as a document, get saved, you close the document on your life and it gets saved to the desktop, is that you continue to exist and you are still aware of your existence. This seems to be logical inevitability because the point of creation almost is to create, obviously. So, I would say that more specifically, the point of creation is to creation of meaning, but even then, that meaning and that all of that, value, whether it's just information for God to know, or whether or not it's, something else, the impact that you had going forward, all information is only information in context. In fact, information is context. It is context. There is no information outside of context. People say this all the time. It's like, that information's outside of context. There is no such thing as information outside of context. It is context in a very fundamental way. And the context of all the decisions of your life and all the impact of your life, the context of that, other than God, is you. And in order to maintain the information coherence, to maintain the information that has been generated by your being, you must continue to be, even if you don't continue to change. Okay? And this is what I think basically happens when you die, essentially, is that unless you get deleted by God, and I think that the reason why he would delete you most likely is that you have basically deleted yourself. You're the one that did not, that basically just caved to every instinct and circumstance that was put into your life, and you didn't take an intentional perspective on how you handle things. And so basically you become like an unconscious algorithm eventually. You just keep giving up your sovereign what is it I guess be personness. You give up. There's a word that I'm trying to think of, but I can't right now. But you give up your sovereignty, your personal sovereignty, essentially, again and again and again and again. And eventually, you just like there's barely any left. You're just an AI algorithm like Google's advertising algorithms. It's just a reactive thing. It doesn't really. There's nothing there much, and so that I think he's right about is that it is on us much more so. It's almost like if God deletes you, it's almost like there was nothing really left to even not to save. It's like it's like if a file got corrupted on your computer. That's basically like what it is. There's nothing. Why would you save a corrupted file? You can't do anything with it. And but you just leave the change space, but you're still there. You must maintain your sentience in the afterlife if you don't get deleted. You have to. It's kind of a logical inevitability because it's the only way to maintain information coherence. So an afterlife isn't something that's just this hopeful thing that I hope I go, that there's a heaven, or I hope they go to hell or something, which hopefully you don't try and avoid thinking that about people, but leave that to God. But it's not just about that. It's not people. I used to think that religion and heaven and hell, these were just, pillows for scared people to clutch at the end of the night and give them comfort. And I don't think that, I think that the knowing the existence of God and morality and an afterlife is in some cases extremely comforting, and in some cases it's extremely concerning, and that's true of almost everybody. So once you know that, it's no longer, you realize it's not this childish thing. It's also, not only is it produce conflicting feelings, it's also a logical inevitability that this is not the end of your life. It is, if you die here, though, it might be, even if you do go to the heavens and are saved, essentially, like literally, I think that's a great word for it, is saved, like a file is saved, you still would maintain your awareness, your sentience, but you just wouldn't change anymore. You wouldn't have the desire to. You would just be reunited with God, and, you would probably perceive all the decisions of your life through God, from a God's eye view, know what was really bad that you did, what was really wrong that you did, why. You would see, like, if you got a God's eye view, which you probably would at that moment, you would see the impact of a good deed that you did, and then the impact on that had, and that had, and that had, like a Rube Goldberg machine of goodness that flows from every mitzvah, every good deed. And you would also see the same thing from every sin that you did. You would see the negative impact it had on that person, and then on that person, and that person, and that person, and that person. You just see it all, and in a way that we just can't. And then after you do that, if you're not deleted, you'd get reunited with God, and you would probably be fine to just chill. But you would be aware still. You're not there. It's not the same as like just before you're born, there's nothing. No, after this, it's not nothing. If there is nothingness, then it's because there probably was nothing to you already by the end of that. And also, maybe God just made a decision that you weren't worth it. And, I pray that doesn't happen to anyone, but I don't know. That's up to God. I don't even want to say I pray that doesn't happen to anybody, because God, what God does is what is right. But I pray that doesn't happen to me or the people that I love. So this is him talking about psychedelics, and to go into, this further of what is reality. The heavens, it's funny because, people think of the heavens as like the clouds above us and hell is like the fire below us. No, the heavens are all around us all the time. And we just aren't there. That's just, it's like the hard drive of your computer is not really separate from the desktop. It's just always, this reciprocal relationship between the two. But you don't have access to it always, to both always. So that is true of reality in many ways, and I've talked about on here before that we have to reevaluate what is real, what is the definition of real, and that is something that Chris Langan gets into here, and he's right again. Here he talks about psychedelics and
for example.
What's your take on it?
My take is that could very well be true. The psychedelics could open up a gap between your temporal consciousness and your non-terminal consciousness, right? Your mind is it's an extended stratified thing. We're just using our terminal consciousness right now, but there are other aspects to your consciousness. You can actually get, certain kinds of insights and communications if you just open up a gap. You understand? And let them come in and fill the gap, and then, you can see them as they would ordinarily.
So the things that people see when they're on psychedelics, I usually write them off and I tell people, you're just hallucinating. But you're saying maybe that's not all it is. They might be seeing something real.
Well, once again, what is reality? Is reality just stuff out there? No, reality has a mental aspect. Right? And once you admit that basically everything has a mental aspect, then of course what's going on in your mind is real. It takes on a kind of reality. It's not the same as physical reality. It is nevertheless real.
Are angels and demons real?
Yes. Yes.
I think so too. Is there a fear that if you take some of these drugs, you might be letting in the wrong guys?
That's a problem, isn't it? And that's a problem that I think a lot of people have encountered. You have to be a certain kind of person to be able to handle these drugs and not be sucked under by them. Okay, because once your mind is messed with in that way, something else, it's weakened. You're not exactly in control anymore. Something else can come in and grab it. And if you open up that gap that I was talking about, what can come into that gap might not be good for you.
Okay, so. Very good again. So I talk about this too because people always talk about DMT, and I've talked about a theological experience that I had where I saw God once, and I was sober. And people always, though, bring up DMT as like the way to become enlightened. I literally saw a video the other day, and it was a huge Instagram, new age Instagram that I follow, and this guy and this woman were talking about how to become enlightened is to take DMT. And I used to want to take DMT because I saw that I didn't understand a word that anybody was saying about it, their experience on it, but I could see that there was a coherence to what they were saying. They were saying all the same thing, and so I was curious, but I have no desire to take DMT anymore because I had this theological encounter. And I have also had an encounter that I wrote off, and I've talked about it on here before, and it's, you can look at the video, it's saved. It's like, I think it's called Wendigo, something about a Wendigo or a skinwalker, and it's like an old video of mine. It's short, and it's just a clip. And I talk about this encounter that I had while having like sleep paralysis, and I've heard Chris Langan talk about that as well. And I thought that it was a dream. I wrote it off for years, and I was an atheist at the time, and I was a materialist, and I just wrote it off as a terrible, terrible dream, even though it was unlike any dream I ever had in my life. And I'm pretty sure I saw a demon, actually. And I was sober again. I was, 20 years old. This was like 12 years ago. And what I think what is happening, essentially, is that there is a reality that we cannot perceive normally. Just like when you're tuned to a radio station on your car, and normally you just hear that one radio station, but every now and then it's like the tuning gets a little wobbly, and all of a sudden, you start picking up like the like classical music station or the Hispanic station, and you're just trying to listen to, I don't know, the country station. And it's just all of a sudden it's jumping a bit between songs. I think that this can happen to us. And you don't need drugs to do it. But when you use drugs, you're changing the tuning of your perception, essentially, like DMT. And I've no desire to do DMT anymore. And, I've had my experiences enough. And I also think that that there is a danger, though, to doing it. And it is this idea that you can become enlightened by doing DMT might be true for some. It is not true for most. Being enlightened, I hate that word, first of all, because it implies such elitism about, like, what you know. But if anything is enlightened, it is that you become aware of God. That if that, on a very personal level, like, that would be enlightenment. But just realizing that it's all consciousness to some degree, and that there's like machine elves around, which are probably demons. Maybe some are angels. Joe Rogan talks about these machine elves people experienced on DMT. These are probably real beings, and he's talked about how multiple people all at the same time will see the same thing, so that implies it's not a random hallucination. Okay. And as Chris Langan said here, though, he said, maybe sometimes these drugs can be useful and to expanding our, awareness. But they can also be dangerous because you can have an encounter with beings that you're not ready to encounter. And here's the issue with DMT, and I'm just going to state this, and this is not a universal statement, but this is my concern. For one, you're kind of like letting yourself into God's house through the back door. You just found it open and you're like, oh, I'm going to go in here. And you're not being invited. And that is, I think, partially a problem. But two, when indigenous cultures in South America or elsewhere in the world take these drugs, and like ayahuasca, it's part of a specific ritual that their ancestors have done, that their culture is based around, that their political hierarchy is based around, and that their entire theological mythology. And I don't mean mythology in a to mean it's fake. I mean, like, their narratives about the theological concepts and the nature of reality are all built around this specific ritual. There's so much context that goes into this action when these people take this ayahuasca and stuff that you lack if you are watching this YouTube video, most likely. It doesn't matter if you go and you see a shaman and you do it with a shaman. Like, you have no cultural context. It doesn't even matter if you just learn the cultural context. You don't have the historical context. You're missing what these people have that makes it, to them it's a rite of passage, and it's a coming of age, and it's something that they look forward to their whole lives because of that. And it's not the same as just going and trying to do DMT to see more of reality than is normally visible to you. And God chooses to reveal to us what we are ready for. And I think that it is important to just remember that context it's key. And if you aren't ready for that experience with reality where you'll perceive beings that you normally don't, and that are real enough, at least, you could be in serious trouble. I mean, if you really could. I wouldn't even want to take DMT probably ever in my life, even though I really believe that I understand reality very well compared to most people. I still wouldn't want to do it just because I don't see the real need right now, but also because I think that there's other ways. I know there's other ways. I don't even think there's other ways. I know there's other ways to have a profound, life-changing, personal encounter with God. You don't need drugs, usually at least, and just remember that context is important, and you might, if there are demons there, they're gonna take advantage of your ignorance if you pull the curtain up and you're not ready for what you see. They will take advantage of that. Like that's I would assume. So just be careful. And but I also understand what he's saying, that there could be uses to them, and I think there are. But those uses are not, I'm going to take DMT and become enlightened. No, there's a whole context and culture and narrative and tradition and history associated with those rituals for a reason. Nobody just sits around and smokes DMT for the most part. Often, even in a lot of these cultures, there's a very specific ritual attached to it for a reason. And that's also, I think, one of the reasons why a lot of people that do DMT and do come to the realization that everything is consciousness and we're all one, and this, they still don't have a moral change. That doesn't mean that they, I'm expecting them to act differently and never sin again, but they don't have a change in what they would define as good and sinful. And you would if you saw reality truly, and it changed your worldview. And I don't know how much actually you should have that. I honestly think that you probably shouldn't even see that stuff unless you already believe a certain perspective that is going to be revealed to you. It's almost, and I've talked about this before, when I had my theological encounter, which I'm not going to talk about tonight because context is key, and I just don't have the time to get into the context of it right now. But I've talked about it a few times on my channel in key moments. But I was thinking about the structure of the universe when I saw it. I was already thinking about exactly what I saw. It wasn't like I saw anything new. I saw exactly what I expected. And I think that that's an important thing to just consider. If you see something that's totally unexpected and you never expected to see it because you had some experience where the curtain was lifted on reality, then that's probably means you're not ready for the curtain to be lifted. So this next one is very important, I think, right now, and it's very current in the times. This next clip is about UFOs, and it's interesting because I worked with the guys at the Daily Wire for years, and I've just seen kind of a lack of acknowledgement by a lot of right-leaning news organizations about this phenomenon that is growing in narrative, I guess, right now. And I really liked that Michael Knowles brought it up with Chris Langan. And we're going to talk about what Chris Langan's answer is, because I actually believe that right here is part of the reason why maybe the Daily Wire did not air this. And I still think that that was wrong. I totally disagree with their decision not to air it. I think that Chris's work is important and it should be shown to the world. And that, nobody's perfect, but Chris, there's nothing wrong with, there's no reason to not, publish an interview with Chris Langan. He's all of the interviews that I've seen is great. Like they're just great. Why would you not push them? He doesn't say anything terrible or cruel at all. Even if you disagree with it, he's not cruel or anything in these interviews. It doesn't make sense to hold it back, other than you don't maybe want to push something that a lot of people would think is crazy, and that's what we're gonna talk about here. Also, obviously, we know why the anti-theist. There is no such thing as atheism, okay? And there's only anti-theism, and we'll talk about that later. But why the anti-theist, anti-theists would not want to push Chris Langan, obviously, that makes sense, because he is a worthy intellectual contender to anybody, and is pushing a narrative that is a threat to anti-theists on every level. But I think that this was partially one of the reasons why the Daily Wire didn't air it. And by the way, like I said, I don't agree with that at all. I actually agree with what Chris Langan says here. I think it's great. I talk about this. I have a whole stream about it, and I say basically what he says.
God is real. Angels are real. Demons are real. Is the devil real?
Oh, yes. Yes. Well, it has to be. We were talking about Michael Knowles being surrounded by the medium, and, you've got a boundary. Well, God has a boundary, too. He's got a very tight...
And you get a grant.
This incidence is simply too
Hold on.
large. People, I don't want to blame the world banksters for this.
Okay, here we go.
That's a conspiracy theory. Then who is pulling all those strings? Okay? Could there be work when there was no actual reason that should have happened? In other words, but they're very cagey about it. If they want to recruit you, they'll probably do it obliquely. If you don't apply to actually join an intelligence service, but they're interested in you, they will try to get you involved with someone who they control. And
Hold on 1 second. I'm going to just get it to the right spot. Here we go.
and things like that, but that's it.
Since we're already in it, there are going to be people out there who say, this guy he's talking about every conspiracy theory I ever heard in the whole book. Since we're already in it, to take a slightly different tack, but still within the realm of what Wikipedia is going to call it, conspiracy theories. Do you believe in aliens?
Well, I will say this, the intelligence community, large sectors of it believe in aliens.
Really?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. It's a big, they're constantly discussing these things. Yes. And if you look at the global elite, and you wonder, well, I don't want to blame the world banksters for this, that's a conspiracy theory. Then who is pulling all those strings? Okay. Could there be another kind of entity, aliens, demons, whatever? Could there be something that's pulling their strings that the global banksters know about, right? And they're taking orders from, but they're being totally concealed and hidden from the public. This is a viable hypothesis, and it's one that the intelligence communities don't reject.
It's funny you pose
Which is, kind of neither here nor there, because the intelligence communities themselves could be run by aliens, for all we know.
People are going to be laughing when you say that there are alien that
Well, let them laugh, okay? But they won't be able to come up with any supporting argument against what I'm saying. They don't know enough.
Well,
they're ignorant.
It's funny that you mention aliens and demons in the same breath, because I don't particularly believe in aliens. I mean, what do I know? There are a lot of things I don't know about. But I certainly believe that demons exist. I'm pretty confident that demons exist. I'm less confident that aliens exist.
Well, but the thing is, a lot of people are reporting that they're seeing these UFOs and
the tic-tac.
other strange alien suggestive phenomena.
Yeah. So what is something like, they call it the tic-tac, of these weird UFOs that seem to violate the laws of physics?
Correct. Basically, they look like little blobs of light or spheres that can commit these maneuvers that are totally against the laws of physics as we understand them. Right? They look like they have mass, but somehow they're not subject to inertia. They can turn on a dime on a right angle and continue at the same speed. They can accelerate at a tremendous G forces. Okay, how can that happen?
Do you have any theory?
Well, yes, I do. But it's it's fairly involved. Basically, when you reduce the world to telesis, you understand that Reality consists of a merging of mind and matter. It's an interplay, of the two.
It's not just stuff, and it's not just pure abstraction.
It's not. It can be real without necessarily being a completely physical phenomenon. Okay. In other words, there can be a mental component to it.
Okay, first of all, totally agree with that last statement. I think that that's what's happening with these craft. There's something about how they understand information coherence in the universe that allows them to maneuver in ways that we just don't normally have in our technology, at least that's public. I have a video of a UFO. I don't know what it was, but it was the craziest thing I've ever seen in the sky. And it's posted to my YouTube channel. And there's also a stream about this topic that I did that's called UFOs versus wasps. And it compares wasps and their parasitic underground dwelling nature, essentially, to many stated attributes of UFOs. And it's interesting. And it's purely conjecture, but it's backed by some logic, too. But one of the things that he talked about here, and this is what I've noticed about the UFO phenomenon. I love that Michael Knowles asked him this question because I think it's an important one today to ask. And I tend to think that these beings do exist, whatever they are. I think that those grays exist, and I don't think they're from another planet. And I think that there's other possibilities that are, that are more likely. And Chris Langan has stated this too, basically, though, that they could be us from the future or a previous civilization that was a pre-cataclysmic, pre-flood type civilization that I don't know, like there's holdovers from, and that there's aliens. And he said it could be all of them as well. It doesn't have to just be one. And I think that that's valid. But the thing that he says, even though the mainstream media is reporting on, UAPs and UFOs at this point, and the Pentagon has acknowledged things, finally, but there is one thing that he said here that is why it drives what he said beyond the pale of the mainstream. And I actually think that what he said is very, very logical, which is that whatever these beings are that are, if you assume that they're here, the idea that they are manipulating humanity and not just standoff observers makes an enormous amount of sense. And that they might even be collaborating with certain people at some point. I mean, Bob Lazar talked about how he was even told this. And, not saying that he wasn't lied to, but I'm just saying that there's a reason that they're not revealing themselves to us. There's a reason why people see things and it's so laughed at still. There's a reason why supposedly, and there is lots of evidence, the more that you look at into it, there's lots of evidence that things have crashed and the government has recovered it. And none of this, though, is revealed by other nations. It's like if Russia knew that we had recovered something at Roswell, like why would they keep silent about it too? Why? Or if things had crashed in the United States, why wouldn't they have crashed other places? And why wouldn't one country at some point be like, what? Screw the secrecy, we're going to reveal it to the world. It implies that there is a control structure beyond human nations. And I'm not saying I understand that, but I'm just saying that his hypothesis here that there are beings from somewhere, who knows, maybe from here, but that are technologically advanced compared to us, that are pulling strings of, human institutions is not far-fetched at all. I understand why people don't even want to entertain that idea because there's nothing you can do about it. For me, it's just interesting, but I actually believe that that's probably the case. But it also doesn't, you can't let it destroy you and just feel helpless either, because there's literally nothing you can do about it if that's the case. I mean, you got to wait for God to sort that out. If there's beings that are more technologically advanced than us, then they just are, and you just have to continue living your life the best you can. But there is lots of logic that would back up that idea. Much more logic than many of the more common alien narrative, commonly accepted alien narratives of like the mainstream. But as soon as you say, oh, maybe there's beings, and they might not be from another planet, or like I said, I don't think that they probably are, but they might be, that are in some way interacting with human power structures. That is, if they are here, then that seems to be implied by just the way that this subject is handled by the nations. It's not handled in a way that is normal compared to other secrets, even. Like, the secret is enforced on a level that's transnational. It's global in a way that other things are not. It's just interesting. I think that he's right. I don't think that is a bad hypothesis. I think it's very viable. That doesn't mean it's true. It might not be true, but and I know Michael Knowles said people are going to be laughing. Let them laugh. I agree with Chris Langan. Let them laugh. If I sit here and I'm like, I had this theological encounter. I once saw like what I think was a skinwalker, and I videotaped and put up this craft that I saw floating above, the 210 freeway in Los Angeles. And by the way, I wasn't the only person who did that. There's multiple videos on YouTube. If you search the date that I videotaped it and put it up, there's multiple videos of other people videotaping the same exact light in the sky. And I see lights in the sky every day, so it was not like that. Chris Langan talks about an encounter that he had here, though, where he saw like a giant metallic oblong craft hovering in the forest when he was working for the Forest Service, and he just watched it for like 30 minutes and then just got bored and left. And totally believe him on that. Like, I just do. I mean, there's no reason to lie about that, and I've seen him talk about it in other interviews, and it was the same story, and it's just no reason for him to lie about that. And I videotaped the thing that I saw, and so like I'm not lying about that either. And there's things that people see. Who knows what they are, or where they're from, but they do seem to defy the conventional rules of propulsion, as far as we know them. And that's even apparent in the video that I took. The more you examine it, you're like, that thing just looks like it's stationary the entire time, but then you realize, if you know the area, that it appears to also have moved somehow without looking like it's moved. It also has somehow moved in 2 minutes, like 20 miles. It's just the craziest thing. It doesn't even make sense to your mind. And that's probably because it's messing with the information coherence of the universe in a way. It's doing what he's talking about at the end, where like they're aware of how the universe isn't just stuff like matter, and that you can maneuver through dimensions essentially that are not the typical space-time dimensions, essentially. Yeah, I mean, I think that they're kind of moving through the substructure of reality more so than just the desktop. Is a theory. That's just my theory. And like they're using the non-local structure of the universe and its entanglement relationships to maneuver, I think. And that implies, an understanding of how this is about mind. And there's even stories about, and it's just stories about how these craft might be controlled by, mental processes even. And that would make sense, I think. I mean, you're not moving you don't need to move a joystick. That's not the medium that you're moving in at that point. But yeah, I mean, like I said, that's definitely one of those statements, what he said about like the potential for beings, non-humans, basically, essentially, at least as we know them, to be pulling strings of human power structures and even colluding. That is not as crazy as many people would make it out to be. It's absolutely not. And I did an entire stream about it called UFOs versus WASPs, and I lay out my logic to why that could be the case. Like I said, this is not something that I know. It's just something that I've thought about. And I can tell you I've thought about it enough to realize that what Chris Langan is saying makes a lot of sense. So, hit the like button. Yes, please hit the like button. The king will reply, truly, I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. Yes. Missing the mark, aka the mark of the gospel. Yeah, missing the mark is what sin is described as. It's like you missed the mark. It's you tried and failed, essentially. And I think that's a good way of looking at sin. I think that God is masculine in relation to us. Yes, he is. God is masculine in relation to us. But ultimately, if we are part of God, he must be both male and female at the same time. That's definitely true. We are inside of God. That implies God almost has like a feminine body, but like masculine mentality. And it's funny because Satan is often thought of as having a masculine body, but a feminine mentality. It's the opposite. He's jealous and focused on others and not really as self-aware, and but he's also detached like the masculine body is, whereas the feminine body is what, life grows within, and we are within God, and so therefore like that implies God's body is kind of feminine in form, but mentally he is active and self-aware and masculine. So but like I said, it's the opposite for Satan, which implies that that's probably right about God. God is probably mostly female physically and male mentally, in a way. Or feminine physically, female physically, obviously. But masculine mentally, whereas Satan is like feminine mentally and and masculine physically. It's like the opposite. But that is a good point. Children are androgynous, and we are all children of God, endowed with fragments of him, perhaps. Yeah, I love the radio station analogy. Good. Yeah, it is. That's like there's frequencies of reality that we are not normally tuned to. I believe that completely. Like when people see ghosts, Chris Langan is asked also by Michael Knowles here, and it's another great question. I mean, hats off to Michael Knowles for asking the brave questions. It is a shame that someone, and probably not Michael Knowles, decided that this interview should not have been released, because it was great, and it was brave interview. Like, that was brave of to interview somebody with a 200 IQ, regardless of whether or not they're controversial for any reason, is brave. But to ask questions that most, mainstream, people would shy away from is brave, and I just think it was brave to do this. But it was just unfortunate that it wasn't released. I'm really glad that Chris Langan released it, the audio. I would have, for the rest of my life, I would have at multiple points throughout my life been like, gosh, I wish I heard that interview. But like I said, there's links to it below, and that Chris Langan has provided, and I highly suggest that you watch it and subscribe to his channels and follow his work. His work with the CTMU should be shown. It is hard for many people to understand, and I get that, but like, it's a brilliant piece of work. It absolutely deserves more attention than it gets. Prayer seems to work fine enough. If you can achieve these altered states without drugs, you don't need drugs. Yep. What if they were developed in our metagame? Like these beings? I don't know where they came from, but I do believe they're here, and I think that they are interacting with humanity and manipulating us, because they're secret about their existence, which means they don't want us to rebel against their existence, which means that they're using us for something, probably. And I don't agree with the Joe Rogan mentality that he stated before, where it's like they're just waiting for us to advance and mature as a civilization. They're just hands off, and it's, this is like the Stephen Greer mentality too. It's like this galactic federation of Buddhist enlightened aliens, and they're just waiting for us to become wise. No, guys. Think about what happens to humanity as we get more technologically advanced. Do we become wiser? I bet you humans are wiser than these beings. They're just not as intelligent, probably, and not as technologically capable. But they're probably wiser. The more technologically advanced that we get, at least prior to the Messianic era, the human singularity, the reunification of being, wisdom is technology usually equals less wisdom. More knowledge, less wisdom. And that is probably a trend that continues to these beings, whatever they are, wherever they're from. The idea that they're so much more advanced than us, so they probably are more enlightened. No, they're not. Probably not. Probably morally and spiritually are more ignorant than we are. More detached from God than we are. And just more technologically powerful than we are. So I don't agree with that narrative of it's like Star Trek and they're just, it's the hands-off principle. No. That doesn't make any sense. Anyway, there's no logic behind that at all. There just is. There's like one speck of logic, which is you'd want them to figure it out for themselves. What are we going to figure out? Like, what are we going to figure out? Look at where we're headed. I mean, we are going to eventually we have the Messianic era, the human singularity in the CTMU, and the Messianic era in the Abrahamic traditions. That will arrive, and but like without that, where would we go? And they probably have not had that happen, because it would be a universal thing, not just them. So, next clip is a continuation a bit.
He has this party trick, which is he's a mystery writer, and he has written ghost stories and things. And at dinner parties, he'll say, "Hey," I'll ask a random person. He'll say, "Hey, have you ever seen a ghost?" And he says, a lot of the time, people will say yes. And throughout history, people report having seen a ghost.
That is correct.
And he says, too many people are saying they've seen a ghost for there not to be ghosts, or something like a ghost.
That's correct. That is absolutely correct.
Have you ever seen a ghost?
I've seen things that look like ghosts.
So,
that's the best answer. I like that he said that. I've had that experience, and multiple people that I've been around have seen the same thing at the same time as me, and like, I don't know what it is. I'm inclined to think it's not a ghost in the way that we think of ghosts. It's more probably like some kind of echo through space, through time, maybe, of person. But once I was in my kitchen, and I was probably like 15, and a family friend who was an adult, they were in their 30s, was over at the house, and in my kitchen, there's a living room over the counter. You can see into the living room, and there's also like a hallway that leads to the living room. And this was my parents' old house, and there was like an archway, and it went by the kitchen. And we're sitting in the kitchen, and if somebody had walked by the archway, they would then go into the kitchen. So you'd see them walk by the archway, and then they would disappear behind a wall, and then you would see them come out from behind the wall into the living room. And there was this point where we're both in the kitchen, and all of a sudden, we saw someone walk by the archway. And we both looked. And then I didn't say anything. She didn't say anything. And we both saw each other. We're like looking over the counter, like waiting for somebody to like come around the corner, like maybe a sibling of mine or something. But it looked like an adult. It didn't look like a child. And I'm the oldest. So like, I was 15. Everybody would have been younger than me. And nobody showed up. And then she looked at me and I looked at her, and she was like, "Did you just see somebody walk by there?" And I was like, "Yeah." And she was like, "So did I." And it was trippy. And I don't know what that was. I'm not saying it was a ghost, but like it resembled a ghost. It's that whole frequency thing that I was talking about. Like sometimes the frequency of reality just gets like a little wobbly, and all of a sudden you pick it up. And I'm not claiming to know what that was, but when two people see the same thing in the same moment, it's not a hallucination of something that's not there. It doesn't mean we know what it is, but it's something. And when Chris Langan says, "I've seen things that resemble ghosts," essentially, perfect answer. You know, this narrative that we have among the academics, you know, physicists and such with PhDs usually, who will just dismiss any phenomenon like that, is just, you know, I did that too. Like, I had multiple instances like that in my life, and at the time I was an anti-theist materialist, but I called myself an atheist. But there's no such thing. And but that's incoherent. Do you understand? Like, for me to see that firsthand and still be like, ghosts don't exist, or whatever they are don't exist, that's incoherent. Like, you should believe your firsthand experience above anything else. So
Such
I
a,
have. I've seen things that look like UFOs too. They're there. I mean, if you're not a very observant person, you'll never see anything like that. If your mind is completely closed and you just screen all that stuff out, you'll never see anything like that. But if you're an open-minded person and you're observant, you will see things like that eventually. Okay?
I don't want to put you on the spot to give an example, because sometimes if I describe an experience that I would call religious or numinous, sometimes people say, "Well, describe it." I say, I can go around the edges, but it's somewhat ineffable. Could you describe such an experience?
Well, yes, I could describe such an experience. Okay. Well, on the UFO thing, I was working for the Forest Service near Lewiston, Montana, in the Lewis and Clark National Forest, not too far from Malmstrom Air Force Base. And I was in charge of a mountain range called the Little Snowies. Okay, I was the fire guard, the regional fire guard for that area. And I was alone up there. There were campgrounds, and I'd go up and tend to the campgrounds and, make sure they were all cleaned up and everything. And it was one of my duties. And, I had to be a fire guard, which means spotting and putting out forest fires and things like that. One day I was up there in a Forest Service pickup truck at a certain campground, and I was there, and suddenly I look up, and I say suddenly, it was just in the skies. I became aware that it was up there, and I looked up. There's this huge spheroidal, but elliptical, not a perfect spheroid, like a saucer that was turned partially on its side. And I thought, well, that must be one of those, lenticular clouds that I've heard of. So I looked at it and I figured, okay, now I wonder how this evolves in time. Totally changeless. I actually took sticks and I tried to use parallax to figure out, what is this thing? Why isn't it changing? Why isn't it moving? Why is it completely featureless and metallic looking? Well, it wasn't any lenticular cloud. Okay, and I literally stared at it for a long, long time before I finally just got, okay, it's there. Got back in my pickup and drove away.
Did you call it in or anything?
Well, I've told a number of people about it. Yeah, I didn't call it in, no. It was irrelevant to the state of my campgrounds,
I totally believe him. I totally believe him. That makes, I just do. There's no reason to lie about that. And, you have to take people, like, if you're going to listen to somebody, then you should believe what they're saying. If you think that somebody's lying, then just stop listening to them and find somebody that you do believe. And, if I have somebody on here, and even people that I disagree with, if I'm talking about somebody's discussion on here, it means that, like, I trust that they're, for the most part, honest. And at least I'm taking, what they're saying here as honest. And I believe them. It's brave for, like I said, it's brave for Michael Knowles to have asked these questions. And it's also brave for Chris to have answered them. And, like, I appreciate it. I've had experiences that I didn't want to talk about, and then I did eventually on here, and I've talked about them, and I try not to talk about them too much out of context, anything like that, anything like seeing a phenomenon that's not normally part of, the everyday human experience. I try and keep that within the context of a specific stream, and I don't just bring it up all the time because it's just going to cause confusion, and I don't want to do that. But I appreciate that, when people do admit to seeing things like that, seeing things that resembled ghosts, having some type of communication with God, or seeing a floating metallic craft hovering silently in the forest. Like, that is Those are not common things to happen in our everyday life, but they are actually not uncommon to happen to people at some point in their life. And then, but if we hide that stuff because it's mocked, like we're not going to actually, we're leaving out part of reality that we should be taking into account for some reason or another. And that's not what you do when you're pursuing truth. It's just not. So I appreciate it. They talk about even miracles on here, and I thought that was a good thing to talk about too, real quick. Is
It's funny you mentioned, because sometimes people say, this is a little different than seeing a UFO, but somewhat related. People will say, I don't believe in God. I don't believe in Christianity because I don't believe in miracles. If miracles really happened, we'd all know about it. And if you look at the gospel accounts of miracles happening, the wildest part of it is not the miracle happening. It's the fact that when the miracle happens, everyone treats it as this miraculous event, and then 5 seconds later they move on, and people treat it as totally ordinary. And this happens again and again and again. It's even happened. I would say that I've experienced things that are miraculous.
Yes.
And even in my own life, not 1 week later, I'm just going about my business as though it never happened. Or I'll forget that it happened. It's a miracle, shouldn't that?
But you don't deny that they happen.
No.
Right.
No,
That's
I don't
the important thing. Because then you're really nuts.
Yeah. when you deny that it happened,
Yes,
right. You're so beholden to some preconceived notion of the way things
That's
are.
correct. So who are the real nuts? Obviously, they're the people that are doing all the talk about the alien conspiracy theories.
exactly. That's what I said. I was like, I was nuts when I was like, ghosts are nonsense. Anybody that says they've seen a ghost is crazy. When I've seen things that look like ghosts, and other people saw them when I was with them. Like, we saw the same thing, guys. Like, we weren't on DMT either. I was like 15. This was like a family friend. We were just in the kitchen. And I've never had any kind of like profound supernatural experience or anything like that, abnormal experience while I was not sober. I was always sober when these things have happened. They don't happen often, but if you watch these streams, it might seem like I've had a lot of these things happen, and probably do have more of these things happen to me than most people, but they're not common in my day, but still, it's good that, like, if I'm denying that if I'm like, the people who say they've seen ghosts are crazy, when I've seen something like that, I'm crazy. And I was crazy. You're not coherent when you are detached from that which is necessary for the creation of coherence and the maintaining of coherence. It was necessary for coherence itself. And I was for a while. It's funny, like, people talk about like the idea that you almost can't make sense of the world without God. You can't maintain, basically it's the same thing as saying like you can't maintain coherence. And I think that what it is that you can maintain local coherence in a moment, in circumstances, as you jump from circumstance to circumstance. But if you're going to have like a broad coherence to your life and how you maneuver your life, you need a total context by which to perceive it from, and that is not that's what you're disconnected from when you are disconnected from God, is that ability to maintain coherence over time and be like, wow, I was really being a hypocrite there. And it's like you don't even realize that you're being hypocritical without that. You're just you're able to maneuver in a moment. It's not like you're totally senseless, but you can't maintain coherence from circumstance to circumstance. You can only maintain coherence within specific circumstances. And that is, it makes a lot of logical sense, too. But I think it's important to not judge anybody who doesn't see God. Just on that subject real quick, Kurchai Mungal actually has brought up this quote that I said, which is, if he was ever going to bring up a quote of mine, like, that was the best one. And he even said it to Jordan Peterson, and when he went on Peterson's show, and it was that that it's just one of my, like, I had a revelation when I thought of this quote, and it is that if you're looking for God and you don't see God, and you're genuinely looking for God, then you have to assume God exists for the sake of argument, and then look and now also you're forced to assume that your definition of God is wrong, and that you have to reassess your definition of God and then look for God after that. You have to change your definition of God. Most people's definition of God, if they're an anti-theist, like Richard Dawkins or something, is like, bearded man in the sky throwing lightning bolts, and it's like, I've never seen that. That doesn't, that, of course that's nonsense. But if you don't see that, like, then it's probably because your definition of God is wrong. If you want to be honest and try and, like, approach the problem to see if God exists, you have to assume he exists for the sake of argument and then look for evidence of it. Which sometimes means you have to change your definition of what God is. And eventually you have to think through what the definition of God would be. And if you realize God is the totality of existence as a singular sentient being, or is the identity of reality itself, as Chris Langan says, then look for evidence of that. And you'll probably find it. So, but when Michael Knowles here, he talks about miracles, and he's like, I've talked to so many people that they've said, oh, well, he said, even me, I've experienced miracles, and then I just kind of went, a week later, I just went along with my life, like it almost didn't happen. And I think that that's kind of like all that you can do with miracles is that they're when a miracle, by definition, if a miracle exists, and we should have the term miracle, what it is it's when God intervenes in a situation and causes something that would not be inevitable given the normal laws that he has set up regarding the universe, and changes the situation to make something happen, essentially intentionally. And sometimes that's very subtle. It's just a meeting of people. It's like when I met my wife, the very first date that we had. Very first date, I said to my brother on the phone on the way home, I was like, I have a weird feeling I might marry that girl. And then I did. It's like, what are the odds of that? I've never had that feeling with anybody else. Is that a miracle that I met her? Yeah, it's just a subtle one. But then there's like the splitting of the sea, like, we've never seen anything like that for the most part in our lives, but that doesn't mean it couldn't have happened. It wouldn't be, it's not the normal thing, obviously. That's why it's a miracle. It's an intentional action by God to change reality in a way that that causes something to happen that's not normal, that would not have happened without his intentional actions to cause it. And I think that messes with space-time in a way, even that, like, when that stuff happens, it's almost like Michael Knowles said it, he's like, it's almost like I can't even remember when it happens, and it's hard to. And I think that makes sense. I don't think that most miracles are meant for us to, like, really perceive and, like, shock us into stopping our lives. Like, if you were meant to stop your life, you wouldn't be here. You're meant to live it. So, like, why would God do something that would just stop your life dead in its tracks because you're so blown away? I mean, I've had some incredible, like, experiences in my life that were absolutely miraculous, and you still have to go on, and that's just what you do. There's no other way to do it. You're here for a reason. That's to continue to live, not to stop and just sit in awe, from now on, from the moment of the miracle on. You're meant to continue to go on. So I think it makes sense. But it is amazing, what he said. I think.
Okay, there's obviously something there, or the number of people that report them wouldn't be reporting them. There are people in the CIA who actually claim to have been abducted. I'm not going to tell you who they are, but they're there. Okay? And we're not talking about small individuals or anything. Well, I don't know. I said, then I don't want to talk to them.
Okay. So, next clip. It's funny, they do talk about incandescent bulbs on this, and like how capitalism is basically trying to take away, like, not just capitalism, but how within capitalism there is a control structure that is trying to take away our freedoms, and one of the freedoms that they're taking away is incandescent bulbs. And I keep reptiles and work with all kinds of reptiles, and you need incandescent bulbs to give them the heat and stuff that they need, some species that I work with specifically. And I have had such a hard time finding incandescent bulbs, and it is so freaking annoying that they are doing that, even though I do. I mean, I know a lot of people don't like LEDs, and I kind of do, but not for. I need some. I also, even though I like LEDs, they talk about not liking them. I need incandescents, and I can't find them. It's just funny that they just talked about it, because it is a thing. Go and try and find an incandescent bulb. It's very hard now. So, next clip though. I'm not going to play that one. I thought about it, but it's not relevant to you guys. Okay, this is about anti-theism, this next clip. And this is something I really identify with Chris Langan about now, and and I get it. So this is an important thing that we need to start talking about, because this anti-theism is what is holding science back. It is.
Yeah. Until now, of course, all of that is completely out of fashion. And most of these modern philosophers are, they're really, Frankfurt School type people. And that's cultural Marxism, which of course is just the social program of the Marxists.
But Chris, even though I just wrote a book last year on cultural Marxism, I have been told, reliably informed by Wikipedia, that's just a crazy conspiracy theory.
Yes, well, Wikipedia seems to think I'm a crazy conspiracy theory too. Read my biography there?
Not recently.
Everything bad that you can say, and basically, I was exiled from Wikipedia years ago. I went in and said, no, wait a minute here. No, I'm not an intelligent design creationist per se. I have a different approach to teleology and all that. And I was immediately kicked off Wikipedia. Okay, so they can say whatever they want to in my biography in Wikipedia. There's not a thing I can do about it.
Because you even suggested the idea of some sort of intelligent design.
That is correct. Well, I've been getting trolled ever since around the year 2000. Well, that goes back further than that, really. But when I went on national television and said, well, the existence of God is actually amenable to logical analysis, and you can show that there is a God, provided you have the right. That was enough. Intelligent design creationists, get out of here. So I've been, and these people are, by the way, these new atheists, I mean, they're adamant.
You're talking about Richard Dawkins, Daniel Dennett.
I'm talking about Richie Dawkins, Daniel Dennett, Sam Harris, well, I don't know, Chris Hitchens,
yeah.
I mean, guys of this nature, PZ Myers, and people like that. I had a run-in with Myers. I mean, he hates my guts. He hated my guts 20 years ago. None of them will mention my name now though, because they know that they can be crushed. Deep down inside, they know they won't come anywhere near me. At some point, these people decided that they had to exclude anybody who could beat them. Okay? That's where the cancellation thing began, really. It's a new atheist thing. And now, since new atheists are a lot more fashionable than Christians are, that's the order of the day.
I blame my falling away from the church on just being a punk 13-year-old boy. But the second thing I blame is the new atheists. They were very popular at the time, and I was very taken with them. Chris Hitchens, he's a funny guy. I thought, okay, he must be a smart guy.
Excellent speaker.
Yeah.
Incisive, witty, but obviously he just hates God. I mean, he makes that very clear.
So you're
all religions are evil because they mislead people and drag people away from,
But you didn't just say that he doesn't believe in God. You said he hates God.
Hates God. Dawkins obviously hates God. Why is there evil in the world? Usually, that's what it comes down to.
Right.
Right? Would a just God tolerate all of the evil that is occurring in the world? And the fact of the matter is there can be no good, there can be no pleasure without pain. There can be no good without evil.
Okay, that is something I disagree with him about, but it's I mean, that doesn't mean he exactly meant that. It just, I think there can be almost, it's like more so that there can be no good without the potential for evil. But even then, yeah, I mean, that's it. It's that there can be no good without the potential for evil. You need free will to have meaning and morality and of any kind. And so that means that you have the potential for evil. Somebody once said this, and I forgot where it came from, but it wasn't, original with me. And it was like, somebody said, well, why, if God exists, then why is evil in the world? And basically the answer is like, I don't know, why do you create evil in the world? It's like, it's not God that's creating evil in the world, it's us. It's just, he's just letting us do it, and a good God couldn't even be good without allowing for us to do good, which means, like, if he allows for us to do good, it means he also has to allow for us to do evil. There's no way to do that. But it doesn't mean that there has to be evil in order for there to be good, but there has to be the potential for evil. And that might be what he meant. But there has to be sentient sovereignty in order for decisions to be made and for meaning to exist. And that means that if decisions can be made, then evil can be done. But here's the thing. That question is actually not very interesting. I mean, it's kind of interesting, but it's not difficult to answer like it's made out to be. Why? If there's a good God, then why is there evil in the world? Because of us, and because we're allowed to, do what we want. Because if we weren't, then there would be no goodness either, and no meaning. But here's the thing, though. What he said is very important. This is the key to what he stated there. And this is what I talk about, too. I've never heard him say this, but, like, this is exactly what I've said. It's just in different words. There's no such thing as an atheist, really. Like, agnostics are just careful people. I would argue that if you call yourself an agnostic, you almost believe in God. You just don't want to admit it because for some reason it's not overt to you, or you're like clinging to something that you don't want to let go of. But also it might be just, but for some reason you are afraid enough of just denying, God, which implies like there's some part of you that's not small that does believe in God. I don't really like the term agnostic either. I don't really think that there is people who are agnostic. There are people who are ignorant, and then and that's true, and that's kind of more agnostics. But and I don't mean ignorant in like a moralizing, judging way. I just mean like, you're missing some context that would sway you to state something more confidently. But what I will argue against is the idea of atheism. And Chris Langan argued basically against it in some way too. And when he said Chris Hitchens and Sam Harris and them, they don't not believe in God. They hate him. And that's true. That is true, and it's clear. And I was like that too. When I was an anti-theist. I called myself an atheist, but I was an anti-theist. And I also had like a misconception about what God was. And I'm not saying that they don't either have that. They probably do have that. Otherwise, they probably wouldn't be anti-theists if they really understood what God would be. But they do hate God. Whatever their perspective of who God is, they hate him. And it's clear because all they do is attack it. And you also can't be an atheist. I talked about this before, and it's been a while though. And what it is that because God is fundamental reality, everybody exists and interacts with fundamental reality. Okay, you can be agnostic, or have no opinion, not be sure, which is what atheism is usually described as. If you ask Sam Harris, you're like, "What's an atheist?" He's like, "It's somebody who doesn't believe in God," and it's like, no, I'm somebody who is absent a belief in God. No, that's not what it is. You literally go to seminars and argue against the existence of God. Don't tell me that you are just absent in opinion. But you can't be absent in opinion about the nature of fundamental reality. You either believe that it's sentient or you don't. Because we all interact with it every day, so you can't not have an opinion about something that you interact with every day. You can you can lack an opinion about something that you don't interact with. I don't research Bigfoot, okay? I know nothing about Bigfoot. Just know nothing. I hear people talk about it, I know nothing about it, and I am agnostic about Bigfoot, okay? I have no real interest in it. I don't think it's necessarily definitely nonsense. I don't necessarily think it's true. I'm really like absent an opinion that I think is even worth mentioning. Like, obviously I would have my leanings, but like I also know that it's not worth me mentioning because I've never looked into into it, and it's not something that I've had to interact with, really. But you have to interact with fundamental reality. Everybody does, every single day, all the time, which means you have experience with it, which means you can't be absent an opinion about its nature. You either believe that it's sentient or you deny that it's sentient, and ultimately you will end up hating God, not being absent of a belief. There is no such thing as polytheists, because the definition of God is the highest being, and logically, inevitably, that is sentient existence. And by the definition of a highest being, there is no higher being or even comparable being. So there's no such thing as polytheism. It's a bad word, meaning it doesn't make any sense. Okay? Same thing with atheism. Atheism means like absent theism. You can't be absent theism. You can only believe that God is, that existence is sentient, or you can believe that it's not. But if you believe that it's not, there's going to be, because it's so fundamental to our sense-making structures, it's going to end up causing moral and logical inconsistencies in your ability to sense make over in the macro, manner, I guess. I mean, look at Sam Harris. I mean, I'm not trying to like bash on anybody too much, but like, guys, I was swayed by Sam Harris. I was just like Michael Knowles. I found the new atheist crowd like super appealing, and I followed them and I thought they were brilliant. I remember thinking Sam Harris was like one of the smartest guys. I don't understand how I thought that, like now looking at him now. And I mean, I kind of do if I really think about it, but like looking at his lack of coherence now, I mean, that guy is so incoherent. And it sucks because I think he actually like he has so much will that it seems to like to figure things out, but like also there's something there holding him back. And there's probably multiple things, and I'm not going to speculate necessarily on what they are, but it's there's clearly something there. But I mean, he like that is what happens when you deny, and when you don't just deny God, you're fighting God. You're like you hate God. Like, you do. I know from experience. He hates God, and, I'm not going to speculate about what that means for him, and other than it's just going to lead to logical inconsistencies in his sense-making. That is apparent if you just, like, follow him now. And it's also apparent, though, when you follow physics conversations by a lot of, like, PhD physicists. Not all of them. There's some really good ones that are just quiet and, like, about like this specific subject, and I think that they should be more overt, but I understand why they're not. But you cannot be an atheist. There's no such thing. There's no such thing as a polytheist. There's no such thing as an atheist. There's theists and anti-theists. That's it. And everyone falls into one of these two. There are people that are, also, I don't want to say agnostic, because you can't really be agnostic about fundamental reality. You have to admit, like, what you believe. And I think that even if you do that, though, like, you actually stand a chance at not hating God, even if you don't see him. But you have to admit, like, that you don't see God, and that it's possible, and be honest about how you approach that question. And that's You know, there are people, you can be in a transition period of where you're weighing things, and that would be like the closest thing to agnosticism, but it's not a state really. It's like you're just in a moment of change or of movement. It's not a perspective to have. It's in between perspectives. So I don't even like calling it agnostic. You can't be agnostic about God. You can be anti-theist and you can be a theist. And you can be a really strong, confident theist, and you can also be a less confident theist. And you can be a really strong anti-theist and be less strong anti-theist, but there still breaks down into those two, anti-theists and theists. But yeah, I mean, I fell for the same thing that Michael Knowles fell for. And but it's not, you know what, once I went to my rabbi, and I like, when I go to rabbis, I go to like Hasidic rabbis, like they are not secular. And I went to him and I told him that I had this like theological epiphany and personal experience and change in perspective about God, and how I just was so ignorant and I didn't understand what God was. And he looked at me and he said, you know, people who stop their education, like I got bar mitzvahed and then I was like, peace guys, I'm out. And like all I did up until then was go to Hebrew school like once a week. That was my theological, you know, education. It was just trying to skate by, and my parents were not, you know, they were secular. We would never talked about the Bible in my house or God at all, ever. And that means that my education didn't even reach a 13-year-old level of, as far as, so compared to somebody who is 13, who's involved, who lives in a family of theists. And he was like, my rabbi said, if you stop your theological education at or learning at, you know, as a child, then you're going to have a childish view on God. And I was like, dang, that's exactly what the new atheists kind of have. They believe that he's this bearded man in the sky, if he's anything. It's like, it's this mentality that you give to like 3-year-olds about what God is. But you know, it's not a mature view. And a mature view is one that is coherent and, you know, makes sense with even our scientific observations. So, I mean, the new atheists are falling, though. I mean, atheism, I've said this before, atheism will fall. There's no way for it not to. It can't maintain coherence. It's not going to persist. Theism was the dominant perspective in academia and among the educated and geniuses of the world up until very recently, like decades. This is a new phenomenon. You know, Isaac Newton and people of genius in the past, some of our best thinkers, they were almost all theists. Almost none of them were atheists. And we just think that like smart people are, you know, atheists. And it's funny because Michael Knowles put this. He said, I saw this meme and it was like, you know, you've got the dumb, drooling moron with an IQ of, you know, I don't know, 60 something maybe, and then you've got like the like, I don't know, average academic, and then you've got like the Isaac Newton at the bottom, and basically the first guy's like, you know, God exists, and then and he performs miracles or something like that, and then you've got the academic guy with the 120 to 150 IQ, and Chris Langan calls that the danger zone. I fall into the danger zone, so it's not always like, you know, a danger, but I also was a victim of that perspective at some point in my life, which is that you're smarter than most of the people that you meet, but like you're also, you know, like it just causes you to worship your intelligence, and when you shouldn't. Nobody should worship their intelligence. I just told the story at the beginning of this that like I was able to intuitively understand the CTMU, and after not even trying, after years, I just had a theophany, and it was like all of a sudden I got it. So intelligence isn't all of it, but still, like, there is that funny phenomenon where like the smartest people, I don't want to say that most intelligent, but the smartest people are like, God exists and he performs miracles. Then like the guy who thinks he's really smart and is more intelligent than most, at least average academic, is like, oh, it's all reducible to random incoherent particles that bouncing into each other, and we're just a soap bubble in a random bubble bath multiverse, and it has no coherent explanation for why that exists. And then you've got the guy who's like, just completely ignorant and is like, I don't know what his IQ would be. It's more about ignorance, and it's just like God exists and there's miracles, and it's like things just go full circle there. It's funny how much you can say something that's true and in ignorance, and you can also say something that's true in wisdom. And but you cannot say something that's false in wisdom. You can only say it in ignorance. It's interesting. Two more clips and that's it. This is about rationality of faith. It's just a continuation.
Okay? God knows that there is always the possibility to commit evil acts.
Free will, right? Yeah.
Right. But he has given us free will. Okay? He bequeathed that we're his images. He is free, therefore we are free. And he expects us to fight against evil.
But so
stop it from triumphing here.
Then given will, and the fact that you use these words hate and love, very often when people talk about God, it's as though it were some academic exercise. Well, do I believe in God? But you're using verbs that are more active than that.
Yeah.
Hate and love. Do you think that our discussion or our understanding of God therefore must be active and participatory rather than merely academic?
Absolutely, and furthermore, it must be rational as well as faith-based. A lot of religionists are fideistic, which means they rely completely on faith and say that we can have no knowledge of God. Wasn't that nonsense?
Yeah.
Okay. You have to know what you got faith in.
Yeah.
Okay? How can you invest faith in something that you don't know what it is? You need at least an elementary description of it before you can predicate, before you can attribute faith to it, before you can invest belief in it. All right? If you invest belief in X, but you don't know what X is that meaningful? Obviously not. So faith and rationality are indelibly coupled. Okay? There's just no other way to talk about it.
Yeah.
Okay, so he's totally right again. When people say, do you have faith in God? Listen, I know God exists. I know from personal experience that God exists. And any rational person should trust their personal experience over anything that anyone else tells them. So, like, there should be no argument with me about, you can think I'm wrong, but, like, I shouldn't believe you. If I've had personal experience that validates that God exists, which I have, then I should trust that above anything else. That is the only rational thing to do. It's also a logical inevitability. It appears to me, at least, to be the case, and also apparently to Chris Langan, that God is a logical inevitability. That is more like, it's not as experiential, but it's still first-hand information if you did work through it on first principles on your own and arrive at that. And these two things together, and I realize I'm more confident than most people who would define themselves as believers in God, but due to personal experience and my investment in, really working this out from first principles. But here's the thing. I don't have faith that God exists. I know he does. What I have faith in is that he in his relationship with me. Okay, we misuse this word faith. It's because people who don't understand it, who are, anti-theists, are like, do you have faith in God? Do you believe in God? I don't believe in God. I don't have faith in God. I know God exists. I have faith in his relationship with me. That's a different thing. I don't have faith that my father exists. I know he exists. I've met him multiple times throughout my life, all the time. He raised me. I know he exists. What I have faith in is that when I need him, he's going to be there for me. When I call, he's going to pick up, or he's going to call me back, and he's going to help me get out of a bind if I need it. Or he's going to give me advice that he thinks is true or something. He's going to be there for me. That's what I have faith in regarding my relationship with my father or my mother or my sibling or my wife. But I know my wife exists. I don't have faith that she exists. I know she exists. I have faith in our relationship, but that's what I have faith in with God, is my relationship with God. And I have to, because you just have to. That's what you have to do. It's trust. It's not, maybe faith isn't the right word. Maybe it's trust. I trust my father. I trust my wife. I trust God because I have no other choice. If I don't trust them, then why am I interacting with them at all? And I think that this is just important to realize. I honestly think that words like religion and faith are words that were invented by people to describe things that they don't understand, by people who don't know God, to describe things they don't understand. I don't think faith really is even, the way that we use it today is misused. I'm not saying the original word. I'm just saying the way we use it today is misused. Faith in God's existence. And I realize that I've had more personal things happen and looked more into the logic of God than most people. But you don't have to look that hard in order to gain confidence in that, I talked about it in my video, Theories of Everything, a how-to guide. There's two ways that you can examine the world and your fundamental assumptions that are the assumptions that frame all your other assumptions. And the answer for everybody, if they really get to the bottom of it, is the same, and it is that I am. You exist. That means that existence itself, from your first-hand experience, and also logically inevitable that all of existence is encapsulated in one existence, then you can derive that sentience. That existence is sentient it should be your fundamental assumption, because it is what you trust above all other things. You can't trust anything else other than without trusting first that you exist. I am, I exist, I as a sentient being exist. Every other assumption I have is built on top of that. If you deny that, you are done. There's no logical coherence that you can maintain from building from the denial of your own existence. But once, these philosophy PhD students came into my Discord, which if you'd like to join, we have calls every Thursday at 7 p.m. You can private message me on Instagram and I'll give you the link, and they're great discussions. But once these guys came in who were PhD philosophy students, and they were writing their thesis on philosophy of consciousness, and that consciousness was an illusion. And I was like, who's writing? Who's writing this thesis? It's just there's no way to maintain coherence if you deny your own beingness. And you end up like Sam Harris, where you're like, somebody asks you, does free will exist? And yes, you need to define what free will is before these discussions. But even still, no matter what the definition is in reality of free will, his answer is ridiculous. And he says, it's not that free will is an illusion, it's that the illusion of free will is an illusion. I'm like, bro, you're so lost. But and that's what happens when you just deny your own existence, basically. That's what that is when you say the illusion of free will is an illusion. You're basically consciousness is an illusion of an illusion. And now I make no sense. I'm not even going to try and dissect what that means, because it doesn't mean anything. And so, but because existence is one, then, and you know that your fundamental assumption is that someone exists and that existence at some level is sentient, extrapolate from there. Just think about it. I'm not even going to finish that, but you can think about what that means. Inevitably, there's nothing that you can assume above the fact that existence is sentient. There's nothing that you can assume above that because it is your foundational assumption always, but it's just for yourself. And you're a part of existence, okay? Like, you are. You know that you exist more than you know that your car exists. And if you don't, then you are Sam Harris. Okay, I agree, but anyways, faith or God, theism, and rationality are, and trust, I'll say, as a substitute for faith, are entangled, and our existence here is participatory with a being. Like I said, you make a decision, God makes a decision. You make a decision, God makes a decision, and that's just the case. 2 final clips, really quick, because then I gotta go. I got started so late, so I'm going a bit later than normal. But here. This is a great statement, and I've said this before, and I don't hear other people say this, but I've heard now Chris Langan say this, and he's right. About the simulation hypothesis and mind uploading.
As though every generation in history hasn't had the same delusion. But I always laugh at it. But very wealthy, very powerful, ostensibly intelligent people take this seriously. We're just going to upload our brains.
Ostensibly intelligent.
That's an important caveat. You don't think we're just going to upload our brains to the cloud or something?
That's what reality already is.
We've already done it.
Self-simulation, we've already done it. We are living in the display of a simulation, a self-simulating universe, right? And we are going to be uploaded. When we're done with this simulation, we're going to be uploaded to the source of all truth, meaning, and power. Then, depending on the decision that is made by that entity, we can be redistributed to another universe, a heaven, a hell,
a new creation.
Totally right. He's right. We're already in it. Like, there's no where are you gonna upload it to? Like, no, we're already there. What's funny is that in Scripture, Jesus is described when he comes back as from a cloud. It doesn't mean, if you have Richard Dawkins, he'd be like, oh, it is crazy that being would come from a cloud, in the sky. But think about this. Like, the apple in the story of Adam and Eve isn't an apple off a tree that's like what we eat normally, like apples. It's like that apple. Okay? It's like a bitten apple. It's technology. And the cloud is not the cloud in the sky necessarily. What do we call any kind of distributed information network that is accessible? We call it a cloud. The iCloud, the Google Cloud, the Microsoft Cloud, whatever. Like, we call it a cloud. And, it's interesting that, like, that people talk about mind uploading, but, like, maybe there's going to be mind downloading. And at some point, more so than it is uploading. It's not even downloading. It's like manifesting from, who knows, the network, maybe. But that was just, I agree with him though. Like, there's the idea we're going to upload our minds is just not, it's just a misunderstanding of what a mind is, and also what memory is. Like, you can't upload all your memories onto a hard drive. You don't even have access to your memories. Your memories all the time. Your memories are accessible depending on the entanglement state of the universe. Like, literally, that's what is responsible for you not being able to remember something or you being able to remember something. God controls your memories. They're fixed into the entanglement state that's saved into the assembly structure of the universe. It's not something that is just like in your brain and you just need to melt down your brain and, you know, freeze it onto a flash drive or something like that. That's just not going to happen. And it also is a misunderstanding of what mind is. So, but I agree with what Chris Langan is saying. Final quote from Chris Langan is extremely wise. And, you know, when people ask me, they're like, how can I become more attached to God? And I usually give the answer of, you know, just pray before meals, or like thank God, or just say thank you. You don't even have to say God if you're not comfortable saying God, but say thank you for this food in front of me. And it is a reorienting thing to do, and it expresses gratitude, which is something that you only do towards beings that are sentient. You don't say thank you to your car. Say thank you to your grandmother who gave you the car or something. And but Chris Langan was asked by Michael Knowles, what advice do you have for people? And I actually like Chris's answer even better than mine. You know, regarding like a first step in like life. I think it was great, and this is it.
Pardon me?
A new creation, right? The idea of the resurrection of the body. Right?
That is correct.
So,
That's why they want to upload their content. All right, so they want to displace reality itself by recreating reality in a mechanical form that then they can control.
do you think there's any relation between the transhumanist movement and the transgender movement? The idea that we're just going to escape our bodies?
This is not what I was trying to say, but
the idea
it's curious.
think,
I don't remember what he
is
said.
that you can throw off all constraint.
Yeah, okay, I agree with what he's just said there. He said the transgenderism movement and the transhumanism movement are basically the same, and that's true. It's just the idea you can throw off all constraints that are intrinsic. And let me say, constraints are freeing. Constraints are what allow you to have direction and purpose and meaning. And if you threw off all constraints, you would also throw off all of your meaning. So I will just say that. But now we're going to get to the final clip that I meant to play. But I'm actually glad that we played that, because he's right. I didn't even hear that the first time I listened to it, but it's about throwing off all constraints and responsibilities in the same, they're the same thing.
Teleological, both of them.
I agree.
Right, we do have certain constraints. Reality is full of constraints, and we're better off recognizing what they are.
Amen.
Before I let you go, as we sit here in the clouds, in some simulation of the clouds here, before I let you go, people are going to be asking, so what do I do? What should I do right now? Assuming we're not going to launch the Second American Revolution or anything like that. What should I do in my own life? Even maybe beyond any political questions.
Search for God. Ask God to establish a personal relationship with you. It's available. You're attached to God by your soul. Okay, there's this soul that attaches you to God. You can receive the will of God into yourself, and to some extent the power of God into yourself, but you've got to be receptive. If you're not receptive, then you're cutting yourself off from God. Okay, and once you do that, then you do not share the identity of reality itself, and you're done. Once your physical body expires, there is nothing that will carry you, because you have denied it and rejected it. Follow me?
I do.
That's what people need to do.
I do. I think that's good advice.
Glad you agree.
Chris.
That's good for you.
It is. It's good at sort of like reaching out and grabbing you. Do this. Do that. Search for God. So this is there to shake the audience. Chris, this has been a true pleasure. Thank you for coming out. Thank you for making the trek.
Well, it's been my pleasure. I don't travel.
And then they didn't release it. But that's not on Michael Knowles, I don't think. But that is just the greatest way to end that. I'll look at the final questions in the chat. Please hit the like button. I'll answer any before I leave. And I am going to work on getting these to be earlier in the day, but I hope that you guys liked this. And I almost postponed it, but I didn't, because I wanted to talk about it. I want to also say again, even though this wasn't released, and I hope that I don't get struck with copyright by anybody, I am deeply grateful that Michael Knowles had the guts to do this, and I'm deeply grateful that Chris Langan did as well, and I'm deeply grateful that this was released. This was a great talk, and there's links below to their entire discussion to those of you who would like to listen to it in its entirely. In its entirety, I highly recommend it. This was, conversations like these are important. They're very important. So, God is not a he, it's an it. God is not an it. God is a who. God is not an it. God is masculine in his relationship to us because he is higher than us in a hierarchy that makes him masculine. And he's also active in his mentality that makes him masculine. He is feminine in attributes as well, but he is not an it. God is not an it. God is a someone. He is a who. That is essential. That is the definition of God that matters. Prayer seems to work fine enough. Yeah, it does. Asking God to form a personal relationship with you is a prayer. And guess what? God absolutely hears that prayer. I ask God of that all the time, and I've had, that, and sometimes I'm more distant and sometimes I'm closer to God, and whenever I'm more distant, I try and get closer. And you do that by, approaching it as you would approach a who. It's not about doing the right things necessarily all the time, even though that is attached to it, but that comes with, recognition of the relationship. But it's also just about acknowledging that there's a relationship in your communication. And it's don't try and hack reality. There's a lot of this is how you hack reality and manifest everything you want. And not saying you don't influence, the manifestation of things in your life. You absolutely do. But, don't treat reality as a game to win. Treat it as a relationship with, someone who's basically like your leading spouse and parent at the same time, and more. Reality loves you. That is more than anyone here does. God loves you more than anyone here does. That is a logical inevitability. And, that's why he judges actions that we take, because he loves us. There's no, just like your parent. Nobody thinks a good parent is somebody who just gives their kid everything they ever asked for. You want unlimited candy? Here you go. Now you're a teenager, you want drugs? Here you go. That's not a good parent. A good parent is one that, wants what's best for you, and also wants you to take responsibilities for things. So I think that Chris Langan's advice is great. What's that, memes of destruction? What if they were developed? Take care and God bless. What's up, Chris? Great stream tonight. It was sharp and on point. Tyler, God bless everyone. Yep, God bless you all. Like I said, if you'd like to join our Discord discussions, private message me on Instagram and I will send you the link. And please see sentientsingularity.com. Please see the links below. Check out the CTMU. Chris Langan's work definitely deserves to be, shown. And hats off to Michael Knowles again for having some balls and having this discussion. And, trying to think if there's anything else. But hit the like button. Share this with anybody who you think might gain something from it. And if you are Chris Langan or the Daily Wire, please do not strike this with copyright. If you want to discuss anything that I shared here that you didn't want aired, you private message me. But I don't think that I did anything wrong. All right, guys. Peace. Until next week.